Okay, what you're looking at here is the weather port that we use to cover the excavation area that we work on each year. And I've been conducting these investigations out here for almost 20 years now, and we've collected a tremendous amount of archaeological data on prisoner life. When we were working at Block 4, we worked there probably 6 years and excavated quite a bit of the interior of the building. And the weather port here is over top of Block 6 now. And Block 6 is where the hospital was that the prisoners who were sick ended up. And the materials that we're finding in the hospital are very different than the kinds of materials we were finding in Block 4 and any of the other block areas that we've done investigations at. This is our 3rd year working at Block 6, and we expect to probably work at least 1 more year in the building itself. It's a lot of time to spend, but we're trying to collect a lot of information about the kinds of materials that represent how the prisoners were treated medically, and that of course takes quite a bit of time. It's also one of the things that's really unique about this site is that it's probably the only one of the prisons within the Union or the Confederate side that have had this amount of archaeological work conducted and have such a tremendous amount of historical data to go along with it. In addition to working on the buildings, we also work in the latrine areas, and the latrines are the most significant aspect of the archaeological record. We'll go up and take a close-up of that in a second, but these latrines were used for about 3 to 6 months at a time, and then they were filled in and they were left, and a new latrine was dug behind each building. So each block, like Block 4 or Block 6, has its own set of latrines, and therefore you have this basically set of time capsules that represent the activities behind each of those buildings. So as we excavate the latrines, the key for us is to try to find out exactly when this latrine fits into the chronologic record of the site. And the latrines, the set of latrines are clustered around where the 1862 wall was, and then when they expanded out to 1864, there's another set of latrines out there. Okay, here we're looking at some latrine excavations that we've done over the last 2 years. These latrines are located pretty much along the 1862 wall, and you'll notice this latrine here, this is about a little over half of the latrine that we excavated last summer, and you'll notice it doesn't go that deep. The bedrock here is only about 25 or 30 centimeters from where we encounter the top of the latrine from the subsoil. So their latrines here didn't last too long because they weren't that deep to begin with. This feature represents about half of the latrine. It continues to the north, another 2 meters or so of actual latrine. These latrines are typically 12 feet long by 8 feet wide, but we work in metrics out here when we're doing the archaeological study. You notice all the orange posts out here. These represent the grid system that we impose on the site to help us keep track of exactly where everything comes from, called the provenience or provenance, and that's critical in an archaeological investigation. And you'll also notice that in that latrine, the soils are fairly level, and that's because we dig these latrines in 5-centimeter arbitrary levels. So it takes us quite a bit of time to remove everything from a latrine, but we end up with having everything well documented, photographed, and mapped, and know exactly where all the materials came from. Okay, what we're at now is actually inside one of the latrines that was used by the prisoners from block number 6. And this latrine here we've started the excavation on this year, and we've gone down just probably about 20 centimeters into the latrine itself. The latrine is defined once we get through the topsoil down at the subsoil. The area of the latrine is much darker in color than the surrounding yellow clay. As you get into the latrine, the significant part of this, of course, is the kinds of materials that end up in the latrine. Typically, when something goes in a latrine, it's not going to come back out until it's maybe excavated 100 and some years later. The materials that are in this latrine represent things that fell out of prisoners' pockets, things that were dumped in the latrine as trash, and other materials sometimes related to actual foodstuffs. We've done soil analyses on these latrines from the hospital and actually recovered parasite eggs as well, so we can determine some of the diseases that the prisoners suffered from. In this particular latrine, as we work down here, we've exposed this large lump of what looks like a green glass, and it's actually residue from when they were creating lime at Johnson's Island. They had a lime kiln here, and you'll see that it's part of this zone of lighter colored material, and this is all lime that they put in on top of the latrine to help with the odors and things while it was being used. And this is probably the largest lump of lime residue that we've actually encountered here. And there's other materials, some rocks that were thrown in just from the prisoners or the guard getting rid of some of the materials around. And then as we work our way down here, you'll notice this piece of glass right here. And this piece of glass represents the base of a bottle. And we don't know how much of this bottle is in existence, but oftentimes it might be the entire bottle that will be here once we get it fully exposed. We do, of course, have other pieces of glassware, bottles that have been broken and that are being thrown in as trash in the latrine. And finally, way back here, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a piece of yellowware. And the yellowware that we find almost always represents chamber pots. And we find typically in these latrines at least evidence of 1 or 2 chamber pots that broke during their being emptied, and then they're being tossed in the latrine.